Hi, everyone. This is Mason Richey here from the Asia Society Korea. And we're happy that you're able to join us today and have this Zoom webinar on the situation regarding Kim Jong Un's health, which at the moment that we're recording this is still up in the air. We don't necessarily have a lot of facts, but that doesn't mean that we can't talk intelligently about what's happening in North Korea, what the media coverage of this situation entails. And to that end, I have joining me today three absolute experts on the Korean Peninsula and on North Korea. In the first place, I have joining us Andrew Salmon, the Seoul correspondent for the Asia Times, author of numerous books on the two Koreas, including Modern Korea and To the Last Round, the epic British stand on the Imjin River. Additionally, we have Barbara Demick, journalist, former bureau chief for the LA Times in Korea, a winner of the American Academy of Diplomacy's prize for distinguished reporting on foreign affairs, and of course, author of the book Nothing to Envy, which was a National Book Award finalist. And finally, we have joining us again, an expert on the Korean Peninsula at the Asan Institute, Dr. Go Myong-Hyun, who's written more about North Korea than I could ever possibly read, to my detriment, of course, and whose work spans a tremendous number of areas. Most recently, we had him on to talk about issues regarding the coronavirus on the Korean Peninsula, including in North Korea, which was perfect for us because he actually did some work in the past at UCLA on epidemiology. He's also written a ton about North Korean human rights. He's written a ton about North Korean politics and North Korean regime survival. And so we are absolutely thrilled to have him here joining these other two illustrious lights. Luckily, the Asia Society was smart enough to find a small pinprick of light who won't get in the way of the star shining today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and I'm going to just ask one very first brief question. And I think I'm going to start this off with putting it to Andrew. Can you sort of give us, as of today, which is Wednesday, April 29th, an idea of where we are in the rumor mill on Kim Jong Un's health?
Very, very briefly, yeah, the rumor mill has pretty much spun out of control since that very early report from Daily NK, which I think is a rather credible source. They do source reporting from inside North Korea, quite unusually using smuggled Chinese smartphones and cell phones. Since then, of course, we had the CNN report, which suggested that not only has he had some form of surgery, open heart surgery possibly, which was the Daily NK report, but is gravely and seriously ill. And this was followed up by Bloomberg, who also had an anonymous source in the United States on that. So those were the three sort of landmark reports. Over the weekend, we had a range of reports coming in from China. We have one source in China, Chinese officials saying that Kim is either dead or brain dead. Of course, on the opposite side of all this, we've had the South Korean government who've been saying they're seeing no unusual signs. Though, of course, what signs you'd expect to see in such an opaque country is not entirely clear, but no unusual signs. I've also heard from a government official last week that Kim himself had been seen in Wonsan, and that was followed up recently by a slew of reports suggesting that either Kim himself is in Wonsan or at the very least his train appears to be in Wonsan. And then Moon Chang-in, the roving ambassador and very, very well-connected North Korean expert in the Moon administration, who himself is very close to Moon Jae-in, has come out and said that according to his sources, and he does have first-class sources in North Korea, Kim is alive and well. So, make of that what thou wilt.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn then, I guess, to Professor Go and I guess sort of get your take, first of all, on that larger question of where we are in the rumor mill. And then, maybe if you can give a bit of analysis, towards an answer to the question of what signals do we see that something's potentially abnormal, and what signals might we have that the situation is potentially normal?
Well, I think, Andy did a great job of covering this gamut of, all the rumors, concerning Kim Jong Un's absence. And what's interesting, though, is that the commonality across all these rumors is that it's focusing on Kim Jong Un's health. So clearly, if rumors have any, validity, then it means that the Kim Jong is probably, more, out of action to a degree or another. But overall, I think the complete picture shows that, piecing together all these different pieces indicates that Kim Jong is probably still in control, but might not be, healthy. I think that probably that's probably the direction to which we are heading in terms of information, and that's coming out of North Korea, and then the consensus among experts as well. So in that sense, though, we don't know exactly what's really going on, as the facts are not there. But then we can somehow surmise, more or less, what's the state of the state of action, so to speak, in North Korea. And I think in terms of signs of normality, I think there are plenty of signs of normality. And then actually we can see that from the indirect assessment by the different governments here in South Korea, in the United States and China. They only indicate that, even though they don't elaborate their intelligence and where the information is coming from, but at least they indicate that North Korea is not in a chaotic situation. The leadership is not really, the situation is pretty much normal in the country. And you can see that from the fact that except for the silence from the North Korean media, there's no sign of an internal struggle or people panicking in Pyongyang. Even though there's been some reports of some buying spree by panic buying by the North Korean people in the residents of Pyongyang, but that could be due to the fact that North Korea is going through quarantine process or lockdown because of COVID-19 outbreak. So I think there are plenty of signs of normality in North Korea. But then again, there are some strange but at the same time interesting signs that something is afoot, which is the fact that there are many, but then for instance, it's not just Kim Jong Un who's out of the spotlight right now. It's also many members of the top leadership circle, such as Kim Jong Un's own sister, Kim Yo-jong, who's reputed to is most likely to be the successor to Kim Jong Un if something really has happened to him. But also not just Kim Yo-jong, but also Choi Ryong-hae, who's the first vice chairman of the State Council, which actually foremost governing body of the North Korea, and followed by Park Bong-joo, who's essentially the mastermind behind the North Korean economic policy. So I think this is actually very interesting. So if Kim Jong Un is indeed incapacitated for one reason or another, then it's likely that somebody else, like you say, Kim Yo-jong, would want to somehow fill the void and try to project this, perception of normality, but they're not doing that. They're not even bothering with it. So that might actually indicate that, it sounds very paradoxical, but then it might indicate that the top leadership is actually withdrawing from the public view for the same reason. And if I'm allowed to speculate about a potential reason for their, absence from the public stage, it could be because they are practicing social distancing. Maybe indeed the COVID-19 is raging in North Korea. Maybe that's the reason why that Kim Jong Un, along with members of the top circle, have withdrawn from the public stage and they're in self-quarantine.
Great, thanks a lot. I think it's an interesting point you make that we haven't seen very much from the other members of the North Korean leadership. That's an interesting point, and it's something that at least I personally haven't seen a whole lot of discussion about. So it's nice of you to add that. Turning now to Barbara, let me ask you this. We don't necessarily have a lot of information about what's going on. There's a lot of rumors that are flying, and it's because so many of the sources in the reports are relatively thin. There's an argument to be made that we're talking about this too much, and ironically, we're here doing that. I'm aware of that, but I'm just going to ask you a very brief question. That is, why is this a big deal, and does it justify all of the attention that it's getting?
I think it was one of the South Korean officials who called it an infodemic, and they're, kind of blaming the press. And I, as a reporter for many years, I feel sort of obliged to defend us. It's one of these stories that you can't really ignore. And I think all of us covering it just have like, oh my God, you know, because we have, you know, we really don't have, most of us, the kind of intelligence access that would let us know what's going on. And it seems that the people who do have the intelligence access don't know what's going on. So it is a very frustrating story to cover. I think I won't speculate on, you know, what is really going on with his health or the quarantine situation, but I think it pushes to fast forward the question of succession. I mean, normally with a guy who's 36-ish, we wouldn't even be talking about succession. We just think, you know, let's, you know, wait till he's in his 60s like his dad and has had a couple of strokes, and then we'll worry about it. But it really does, you know, beg the question of what is the future of this regime, and is it so fragile that it rests on the shoulders of one person who does not appear to be very healthy? But, you know, regardless of whether he's, you know, what his BMI is, and, you know, whether he's smoking too much, or, you know, how fragile is this regime? And young people die unexpectedly as well. I mean, you know, those of us who've been journalists, I mean, I remember one night when I was staying up late writing an obituary of Václav Havel, my editor called and said, Princess Di was just killed. You know, stuff happens. And, you know, for this regime, you know, he may emerge perfectly fine tomorrow, but there is some damage there because it points out how thin their backbench is, really.
Okay.
So I think there's some damage done.
Okay, that's a great point. Andy, you want to weigh in on that? You're also a journalist. You know, obviously, I think Barbara's right. You know, we need to talk about it. Journalists feel compelled to talk about it. You know, but as I said, additionally, you know, why is it a big deal? If you can add something to Barbara's point about that, and also, you know, does it justify the amount of attention that it's been getting?
I mean, you know, just between you, me, and don't tell anyone, it was kind of a bit of a relief to cover a story that wasn't related to COVID-19 recently. So, you know, North Korea.
How do you know? Yeah. How do you know it's not? I mean, maybe that's what.
I mean, we don't.
Maybe
we
that's
can't.
what's
I mean,
going
it may well be. That's part of the speculation, of course. And Professor Go mentioned it very well. I mean, what I would say is that I'd fully, you know, agree with everything Barbara just said. I'd just add that, you know, you can't ignore this because of the importance of North Korea. You know, it is the strategic dark horse in the very, very center of Northeast Asia, which is one of the world's 3 key zones of economic activity, along with, you know, Western Europe and North America. And again, as Barbara touched on, regardless of whether it is healthy or not this time, if not when. I mean, we know from his family background, his grandfather died from a heart attack. His father suffered from a stroke and died from a stroke or related heart problems. Add to that his very obvious obesity. I vividly remember the first Moon Kim summit in Panmunjom, which we, the Foreign Press Corps, followed from up in Paju. We had this giant TV screen and very, very good audio. And when Moon and Kim were walking up a flight of steps in Panmunjom, or just south of Panmunjom, we could hear over the audio, Moon had no problem. They're walking up this, I think, 4 or 5 steps, and Kim was wheezing away, and we all looked at each other and thought, that doesn't sound good. So, I mean, this is an important story for reasons of heritage, for reasons of geopolitics, and as Barbara touched on, they've got a pretty thin backbench, and we're not sure what the succession process is. And, you know, even in democracies, we've seen Boris Johnson recently incapacitated in the UK with COVID-19. And we're a pretty open, transparent society, and it's not entirely clear what our succession process is if Johnson, you know, didn't make it. So, you know, these are important issues, and they do justify coverage. Even if we don't have our own information, even if we're reporting reports, you can add an analytical framework over this and look at why this is important.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I'm gonna come back to the succession point, because both of you have mentioned that, and you know, it's something obviously that I'd like to come back to. But before I do, I want to maybe get a little bit of historical perspective, since both of you have also mentioned, Kim Jong Il, and you've mentioned Kim Jong Un's, previous health-related issues. And so maybe Dr. Go, if you can weigh in a little bit on this, historically, how does this situation fit with similar events in North Korea in the past, whether that be the death of Kim Il-sung, the sickness and death of Kim Jong-il, previous disappearances by Kim Jong Un? How does what's going on now fit with that? Also, the fact that we haven't heard anything from North Korea regarding Kim Jong Un's health. They haven't said anything. Is that intentional? Is that unintentional? Does that comport with the way that they've handled this type of situation in the past?
I think it's very typical of North Korea to shroud in secrecy the health status of the actually well-being of their top leaders. I mean, I see a lot of repetition of a lot of repeated pattern in both in the media coverage, but also reaction from North Korea. I mean, North Korea has been, starting with Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung, when he passed away back in 1994, apparently, according to the high-level defector testimonies, even the high-level North Korean officials didn't know about his death until the very day that the government announced. So, and then the same pattern, we observed the same pattern with Kim Jong-il. And I think same thing happening with Kim Jong Un. I think this is actually it's a simple. I think in many ways, it's reflected on the fact that North Korea is a totalitarian regime, and then everything. A lot of things are shrouded in secrecy, and the regime itself is very opaque. So, for instance, back in when Kim Jong-il, for instance, had a stroke in 2008, which actually started his decline, which eventually led to his death 3 years later, and then led to the appointment of Kim Jong Un as the successor. For an entire week, nobody in North Korea knew the whereabouts and what's going on with Kim Jong-il. And for instance, but at the same time, North Korea being North Korea, no one was, dare to ask the whereabouts of their top leader, even though he was absent from government and administration duties and essentially governing duties in general for an entire week. So, that doesn't take place in any other country. So that's a very typical of North Korea. And after that, when Kim Jong-il eventually passed away in 2011, the top leaders top officials in North Korea, they only heard of, learned the fact that their leader had passed away from TV broadcasts. So I think, a regime like that, it's, if the insiders themselves don't know much about what's really going on with their top leader, then it's natural for the people outside to not understand what's going on and then, speculate about, the North Korean top officials and the well-being. So it's totally natural, I think. And in addition to that fact, because there's so much information void, the information void is filled by speculation. But then we have to understand that in these kind of absences by the top leader for a considerable period of time, it actually has been very frequent in the past. And for instance, we made, all this speculation about Kim Jong-un's health started because Kim Jong-un didn't show up at the birth anniversary of the birth of the North Korean DPRK founder Kim Il-sung back in the Day of the Sun, April 15th. But apparently, with Kim Jong-il, his father, Kim Jong-il only showed up 3 times in the 17 years that he led the country. So back then, apparently, clearly the difference between now and back then is that there's a much less focus on North Korea. After all, North Korea is not. Back then wasn't a nuclear state as it is now. So there's much less attention paid to this kind of patterns. But then, if you look at objectively, this kind of long period of absence is not actually unheard of. So, so in that sense, I think in order to assess correctly the significance of Kim Jong-un's absence today, we have to take into consideration not just the fact that the regime is opaque, but also that this kind of pattern has been in existence for a long time. So we have to actually, essentially balance the 2 different facts and then come up with a more objective assessment of it.
Great, super answer. That's a very comprehensive and a nice historical look there. I appreciate that. Looking, you mentioned the way that perhaps North Koreans might not have even ones who are relatively well connected, a lot of information about the status of their leader. I'm still going to ask this question, which I think I can perhaps surmise and answer, but I wonder if perhaps things might not have changed a bit. And I'm going to go and put this question to Barbara, and that is, what would your typical North Korean perhaps know about the status of leadership? You wrote a book that was literally called The Ordinary Lives of North Koreans. So, maybe at least, you might have some insight into, what types of information they might have access to, and perhaps also maybe a little bit the psychology of to what extent they're interested in this, or to what extent they're like a lot of other people in the world, and political issues are only one part of a much larger tapestry of their life that involves friends and family and food and the other things that people are interested in. And it's not like I walk around all the time thinking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like, did Donald Trump have too many hamburgers today? So if you can maybe give us a little bit of insight into what your typical North Korean might have access to in terms of this information. Are they aware perhaps of what's going on in the outside world in terms of the obsession over what's happening with Kim Jong
Um, I think probably people are aware. I think in the period that I wrote about, which was mostly the 1990s and the early aughts, we referred to North Korea as this sort of biosphere closed off from the rest of the world, with no news, all the penalties for listening to South Korean broadcasts or having Chinese mobile telephones. But I think it's just a much more leaky place than it used to be. We're in this, this information glut era. And, even if they don't have media, I think, reports have got to come, from through those Chinese mobile telephones. Maybe traders aren't coming in right now, but I think people do know, and they're probably concerned. I've talked to a lot of North Koreans about what it was like when Kim Il-sung died in '94. And at that time, many people told me they were so shocked that they didn't believe he could actually die. They really didn't believe he was immortal. And it just never crossed their mind that this aging man could pass away. He was their god. But I don't think North Koreans are like that anymore. They went through the death of Kim Il-sung. They went through the death of Kim Jong-il. And so I think they've got to be watching, and they've got to be concerned about what it means for them. I tend to think that North Koreans are a lot smarter than they're sometimes given credit for. And I think they're, probably like everybody else saying, what the hell? These reports are coming from China. And, I heard it from my neighbor who knew somebody in Busan who had a cell phone, who talked to somebody in China. And, stuff gets around, probably in the form of urban legend, not being very reliable. But I think they probably are talking about it.
Okay, that's fair. It's true. I mean, things obviously are not in 2020 the way that they were in 1994 or in 2008 or 11. And obviously the increased networks with China clearly make a difference. So coming back then to the question of North Korea's regime resilience, I guess you would want to say. Andy, I'll just go ahead and ask you, and then I'll maybe get Dr. Go to weigh in on this as well. How resilient politically and bureaucratically is North Korea in terms of withstanding a leadership vacuum? Doesn't necessarily mean a vacuum because Kim Jong Un is dead, but even if he's had relatively minor surgery and is just in the hospital convalescing for 3 weeks or a month. And then obviously, the more you move up the ladder of severity, presumably the more problematic things become. But how resilient do we think the regime is in terms of handling leadership vacuum, whether that be a relatively small one over a short term or whether that be something more significant over the long term?
Well, I think you've already addressed the fact that the leaders occasionally do sink out of sight or below the radar. This does happen periodically for whatever reason. In terms of the overall resilience of the regime, I would say an extraordinary resilient regime. We have a belief in the West, perhaps particularly in the States, that dictatorships are evil and evil is overcome. Eventually, all dictatorships will be overthrown. I would question that. I mean, Stalin died in his bed. Mao died in his bed. Hitler might well have died in his bed if he hadn't launched World War II. It's not. There's not a definite end game for these kind of people or even these kind of regimes. If you look at North Korea as a monarchy, monarchy has existed on this peninsula for well north of 1,000 years, 2,000 years. The danger is, of course, that when a monarchy does transition or implode or collapse, you have some very, very bloody events indeed. If you look at here in Korea, when the Yi dynasty finally went under, it was replaced by Japanese colonialism, which led to various calamities and atrocities in the region. I'm English. When we had the English Revolution and Charles I ended up with his head removed, we then had a much more dangerous and dour figure that Thomas Cromwell came in, which was in many ways appalling news for both England and Ireland. French Revolution again ushered in enormous bloodshed. So, I would say those two things. One, dictatorships are often extraordinarily resilient. On the other hand, monarchies have proven to be historically resilient, and I think North Korea kind of falls between those two descriptors.
Thanks. I will say this: the one I think in many respects I agree with you. I certainly agree with your analysis that we tend to inject our moral beliefs about the value, the normative values of monarchies and totalitarian regimes into our analysis of their survival, and that we tend to think that the arc of justice is long and will eventually overcome them, which may or may not be true. But as a political scientist, the one thing that we do, I think, tend to know about dictatorships is that they are stable until they're not. And I know that sounds tautological, and in some ways it is, but that's the nature of those types of regimes, is that they may be stable, but they're in some sense brittle. Although I agree with you that there's no sense that we would necessarily read the regime as fragile. I think that there's a certain brittleness, which goes back, I think, to several of the points that you made, I think, beginning with Barbara's point about how there is perhaps something of a weak backbench behind the Kim regime and behind the family. Dr. Go, what's your take on the resilience of the regime in the face of some type of leadership challenge? And leadership vacuum. And I'll sort of make that a bit more complex, or add a little bit to the previous version of the question that Andrew answered, and say the previous transitions in North Korea have taken place under more or less orderly circumstances. By the time that Kim Il-sung died, Kim Jong-il was clearly the heir apparent and had a chance to build up his support in the party and in the military. Kim Jong Un was also similarly, although for a shorter time, groomed by Kim Jong-il to take over. What's the situation with that today? Do we have an idea of who that heir apparent would be? Do we think that Kim Jong Un has had time and inclination in order to build that process up? And of course, outside of his own family, whether that be his sister Kim Yo-jong, or whether that be Kim Pyong-il, who's returned back to North Korea from a long stint overseas as a diplomat. Are there other possibilities, either on or off the radar, who might be in line to succeed Kim if the worst were to happen to him?
So that's great. I mean, that's a great question. And then first, expand upon what Andy made. I think I definitely agree with him about the resilience of the North Korean regime first, and then in the past two occasions or like episode transition that took place in North Korea, with the passing of the North Korea's founder Kim Il-sung back in 1994, and then also the passing of Kim Jong Un in 2011. I mean, North Korea has been pretty flexible and successful and defied prediction of chaos and collapse, and actually continuing on actually quite well. I mean, I would even say that prosper, especially under Kim Jong Un. But then, there's a one commonality to these two transitions, which is not good news for North Korea, actually. Because if you look at the first transition between Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-il had at least, more or less 20 years to, prepare and train himself to succeed his father. I think that he first came on the public political stage back in 1972. And then, then Kim Il-sung passed away in 1994. So he had 22 years to practice and train to aircraft or statecraft of governing a country like North Korea. Whereas with Kim Jong-un, that transition period or the training period has only lasted 3 years. So Kim Jong-il suffered a stroke back in 2008, and he died at the end of 2011. So, and then Kim Jong-un appeared on the public stage in North Korea in 2009. So he had less than 3 years to prepare himself to succeed his father. And this time, if the reports of a serious illness about Kim Jong-un is indeed true, and then it is also true that Kim Yo-jong, his sister, is going to be the heir apparent, then Kim Yo-jong would have had less than couple of months to fill his shoes. So this is an indication that the North Korea's resilience, even though it was actually effective 2 or 3 decades ago, actually the resilience or the potential resilience is actually shrinking, with each transition. So in that sense, I think if we extrapolate from the past data points, yes, we have to be very essentially a little bit cautious about predicting that North Korea is going to collapse because of failed transition process. But at the same time, we shouldn't discount the fact that North Korea might have, may actually suffer from a little bit of a shock from unexpected power transition after Kim Jong Un. So I think this is things that we have to consider and take into account in making prediction about North Korea's near future. So having said that, who could potentially succeed Kim Jong Un? And obviously, I think we know the name. I mean, it's the most a high-profile figure who could succeed Kim Jong Un right now would be Kim Yo-jong, his sister. Now, his sister has been being consistently being promoted after Kim Jong Un became the leader of North Korea, and especially in the last couple of years. And now she's taking the role of essentially she's in charge of the political affairs in North Korea. And given the nature of the communist regime in North Korea, political party, North Korea's Workers' Party is above the North Korean state itself, is in control of every single apparatus of the state. You could say that Kim Yo-jong is de facto number 2 in North Korea right now, and clearly because of her blood ties with the leader of North Korea, she definitely counts with full confidence, maybe not full confidence, but a lot more competent leeway than any of the mortals in the North Korean regime. So yes, she's well positioned to succeed him. But the key weakness for her is that not just that, we've been talking about she being, Kim Yo-jong being a woman, her gender is going to be an impediment to have some full control of the country. But I think, another way to operationalize this gender issue would be that she doesn't have an experience with the military. She doesn't have any connection with the North Korean military, because it's likely that if Kim Jong-un passes away unexpectedly, then the North Korean military is going to be the kingmaker, because clearly the military has the ultimate power and ultimate say who's going to succeed Kim Jong-un. And at this, you had Kim Jong-un had appointed a male number 2, and then the male number 2 in North Korea, like in all dynasties or monarchies, would have had, by necessity, good ties with the military. Because Kim Yo-jong is a woman, she doesn't have the chance. So that's going to be her key weakness. She'll have to earn the trust of the North Korean military, and then she doesn't have enough time for that. And I don't think the North Korean military is actually used to the idea of getting commands from a female leader. So that's going to be a big challenge for her. So what the biggest challenge for her and then for the North Korean state would be the emergence of an individual X that we don't know much about yet. But then that person is likely to have some blood ties to the ruling family, because the source of legitimacy in North Korea comes from the backdoor line of being related to the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung. So even if that person is related by marriage or so, has to have some sort of family ties with Kim Il-sung and Kim Il-sung's family. And in order to make up for the fact that this individual X that we're speculating about doesn't have sufficient blood credentials, so to speak, in North Korea, we'll have to have a good connection with the North Korean military. So I think that's the reason why a lot of people start speculating about Kim Jong-il, who was a half brother or uncle to Kim Jong Un, half brother to Kim Jong-il, the late leader of North Korea, and the uncle to Kim Jong Un. And apparently he was a favorite son by Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, and he had a very illustrious career in the North Korean military. So I think that a lot of people have been speculating that Kim Jong-il could take over. But then the key issue with him is that after he lost the power struggle, where Kim Jong-il had to leave North Korea, and he actually spent 2 or 3 decades at least outside as a diplomat, mostly posted to Eastern Europe. So he just came back to North Korea last year. So I don't think he has the power base or like any connection in North Korea to back him up. He actually launches some sort of struggle against Kim Jong. So I think right now, my assessment on North Korea could be a successful heir to Kim Jong Un changes every day. But I think Choi Ryong-hae could be in the running. The reason why I say that Choi Ryong-hae is that there's some speculation that the Choi Ryong-hae was the first vice chairman of the North Korea State Council. It's actually it's the father-in-law to Kim Yo-jong. So that rumor is indeed true. Then Choi Ryong-hae would have enough credentials, so to speak, to claim the throne. And at the same time, he has a lot of control, a lot of connections in North Korea, and has a very good connection to the North Korean military. So somebody, he might not be Choi Ryong-hae, but then I would say that this the potential competitor to Kim Yo-jong could look like Choi Ryong-hae. So I think that these are the some of the speculation that could have about who could potentially succeed Kim Jong-un other than Kim Yo-jong.
Great, thanks a lot. So we need to wrap up pretty quickly. I have 3 more questions I want to ask. One is directly to Barbara, and then after that we'll have 2 very quick lightning round questions. Dr. Go knows that I like this form of asking questions at the end, so we'll wrap this up here in just a moment. Barbara, I want to ask you this. I want to go back to some of the sort of media, let's call it, critique or media study of this. You made an interesting point when you said that North Koreans, they've changed over time in terms of their access to information. And I would also argue that the same thing is true in the US and in Europe and in South Korea and other places as well, where we've seen the birth over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years of open source intelligence, which is much more sophisticated than it used to be. We have commercial satellite imagery, which is now available through Planet Labs, or that we see from 38 North or from CSIS or these other places. And on the one hand, that clearly gives us more information. We know that Kim Jong Un's train is at Wonsan, or we know that X, Y, or Z nuclear site is functioning or isn't functioning, et cetera, et cetera. More information, all things equal, is good. It also produces a lot of armchair North Korea specialists. As an actual North Korea specialist, what's your take on the growth of open source intelligence and how it plays into the way that we talk about North Korea?
Well, I was just going to make a couple of observations about reporting on North Korea. People in the U.S. are really interested in North Korea. It's you're all in South Korea, so of course you think that Korea is the center of the world. That was my impression when I lived in Korea. But I'm in New York, and the number of emails and text messages and Twitter queries I've gotten about what do you really think is going on with Kim Jong Un is just it's just astounding to me. I'm also very interested in where some of this intelligence is coming from. I don't know that it's open source, but there was a startling report in Donga Ilbo that quoted, and he's nodding here, that's quoted a source in U.S. intelligence saying that they had seen Kim Jong Un walking unassisted at Wonsan, or they had analyzed surveillance footage and determined that he was walking without assistance. And I mean, that I haven't seen that report anywhere else. Maybe somebody else has. I mean, that level of intrusiveness into what's going on in the regime is just, astounding to me. So it's just very hard for them to keep secrets. I'm also speculating, and I'm just sort of guessing based on their mindset, is that they're kind of enjoying toying with us, and I think sort of maybe as a point of Korean stubbornness, that they may not have put a picture in the paper for the last few days. They're just kind of letting everybody twist in the wind. That would sort of be in their personality.
Yeah, I
wanted to say one other thing. I also think it's highly likely that the regime leadership is quarantining themselves at Wonsan. I mean, everywhere in the world, people who have money have gone to their country houses. My neighbors are all gone in New York. Even if it's not a raging epidemic in North Korea, I mean, I would expect the top leaders to not appear in public for a while. And I think that possibility has been discounted.
That's a great observation. Thank you for that. It's interesting that you point out the fact that they might be toying with us. Dr. Go can vouch for this. I wrote him an email last night when we were discussing this, and I said, I wonder if they're trolling us, that they saw how much we were talking about this and decided, you know what, he's been gone for a few days. He had whatever minor ankle surgery or was just quarantining himself because of the virus, and they decided, let's see how long that we can let them twist in the wind talking about this. And I wonder if that might be the case too. I say that half jokingly, but only half jokingly. I mean, doesn't seem totally impossible to me. So I had three actually lightning questions. One of them actually you just sort of preempted with your last answer, Barbara, so I'm not going to ask that one. And instead, two lightning round questions, as I did with Dr. Go and another guest a few weeks ago. I'll just sort of preface this by saying when I was growing up, there was this television show, I'm sure Barbara remembers it, Andrew may as well, I don't know, called the McLaughlin Group, where at the end of every episode, John McLaughlin used to ask his guests, there were four of them, a binary question, either a yes, no, or something where you had to either choose one or the other, and then he would tell you whether or not you were wrong or right. So the deal is you have to say yes or no or whatever the binary is, and then a short one sentence answer, and then I'll judge whether or not I think that you're wrong or you're right. So my first question is, if Kim Jong Un is incapacitated, who is going to be the presumptive leader to take over? Chae Rong-hae or Kim Yo-jong? Let's start with Dr. Go.
Kim Yo-jong. For
Andy.
now.
The conventional wisdom will be Yo-jong.
Okay, Barbara.
Kim Yo-jong.
Okay, yeah, you're all right. Good job. I think you're probably right. I think that the Mount Pictou bloodline trumps the gender issue. Although I think that she'll have to work with allies in order to be able to get the military on her side, as Dr. Go intimated earlier. And then the other question is Kim Jong Un in fact incapacitated and or dead? Yes or no?
No. Absolutely no.
Absolutely no. Andy?
I'd say I think something is wrong up there. I think something is awry. So I would say, if I can, I think something's wrong. But dead or incapacitated, don't know.
Barbara?
I'd second Andy on that. Still alive, but maybe not so well. Maybe not alive and well. Maybe just alive.
Okay. The answer is he's in the basement of the White House playing ping pong with Osama bin Laden. So that's my answer. So, so with that, we're going to close up. I just want to say thanks again to Dr. Go Myong-Hyun, to Andrew Salmon, and to Barbara Demick for joining us here for this Asia Society Roundtable. I hope that all of you who are having a chance to watch this on the Asia Society website have gotten something edifying out of this. And I hope that you will also look around and see all of the other wonderful contributions from those involved in the Asia Society. We have lots of webinars that are freely available, as well as content analysis and other written works as well. So please enjoy your week, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll be able to come back and we'll be able to talk about this issue when we have a few more facts on the ground. So thanks again to all of you. I appreciate you joining us. Bye bye.
Thank you.